Welcome you all to the Richland County Transportation Ad Hoc Committee meeting. This meeting will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
McBride, Livingston, Weaver,
Here.
Walker,
Here.
Mackey.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the April 23rd, 2024 meeting. I entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Move to properly second. Any discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk.
Livingston,
Yes.
Weaver,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next item on the agenda is adoption of the agenda. It's item 3. Any changes, additions, or deletions? Mr. Brown?
No requested changes.
All right, entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Move to properly second. Any discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk.
Livingston,
Yes.
Weaver,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next item on the agenda is item 4, items for discussion and/or action. Item 4A, penny matters pertaining to the duration, amount, and allocation to categories. Mr. Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you, sir. Members of council, we have in our presence today Parker Poe, and Mr. Chair, if you will recognize Mr. Jones, he will discuss this particular agenda item for us.
Before I recognize you, Mr. Jones, I'd like to recognize just 2 of my colleagues who are not on the committee but are present this afternoon for today's meeting. They have a very keen interest in this item, and that is Councilwoman Gretchen Barron as well as Councilman Jason Branham. Thank you all for being here. All right, you recognize Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and other members of the committee and guests. What we thought we would do today is first give you a little bit of an update on the conversations that have occurred since the last time we were together, and sort of then point us forward a little bit to what's on the horizon and what some of the conversation could be today among the committee that would be helpful in terms of guiding County Council at its next meeting. So since we last met, the Transportation Penny Advisory Committee has been busy as requested by the County Council. They have been meeting to bring together a large group of folks. We had a presentation today at the Transportation Penny Advisory Committee from the comment. It was the first public presentation of the comment's needs on the penny. There'll be information that we'll distill and get out to you all, but the gist of it was the comment made a request for roughly $960 million, or roughly 30% of penny proceeds. They were assuming a 22-year penny. So we heard that for the first time today. That was presented and discussed in committee. The other thing that we discussed is really what's in front of you, and this is the projects and principles document that has been working its way through the Transportation Penny Advisory Committee and now comes before this committee and ultimately will come before County Council for a vote. This is the document, you may recall, that is designed to sort of guide how the penny will be managed and how it will unfold, and most importantly, how things that appear on the transportation needs assessment list that was prepared by Stantec and other needs that are now coming forward. We had a meeting yesterday with the City of Columbia where they presented their list of needs, which is in many respects augmented and modified from what was initially presented, but some new items were presented and some of the items were updated. They reflected, for instance, less of a request with respect to the Assembly Street rail crossing because of some federal dollars they were expecting. So that request went from 300 down to 25 million, which is what they need for matching money. But then there were some other requests that filled in around that. But the point in telling you about all the requests is just, I think, hopefully to recognize the need to have a set of defined principles on how we decide to turn those needs into actionable projects, and then how we turn the projects into categories that will appear on our referendum ballot. You may recall that Council has divided up this referendum question, divided the projects to be addressed in this referendum into 3 categories. Community investment projects, which are projects that are really intended to be those that impact the day-to-day lives of the citizens in Richland County, to include county-owned roads, sidewalks, other pedestrian byways, bikeways, etc. The second category that County Council has identified is county advancement projects, which are projects that would have a county-wide impact, large thoroughfares, or other large projects that would impact areas where there are high traffic. And finally, the comment enhancement projects. And comment enhancement projects, as I explained earlier, or what we got a taste of at the Transportation Penny Advisory Committee earlier today. So one of the things that lay before us as a council and as a committee is first, second reading is on May 14th. And this group may recall that there were a number of unresolved questions in the ordinance that was presented at first reading, namely how long the penny was going to be in effect, and the dollars that would be tied to that, the project costs that would be tied to that. We also talked about how the project categories would be divided. So you may recall that we began, for purposes of discussion in the ordinance, we had 40% of the penny allocated to community investment projects, 40% of the penny was allocated to county advancement projects, and then 20% was allocated to comment enhancement projects. And those will be items that need to be settled, if you will, so we can settle them in the ordinance that we present to County Council for second reading. I would also just remind this committee, as we go beyond second reading, we have a long and intentional period between second and third reading. So second on May 14th, third not occurring until July 16th. The intent of having that long period is not only to allow this council to have another work session in June, but also to allow the TPAC and this committee to continue to do its work. And ultimately, the touchstone of that work will be to finish the document that's in front of us, to have a final projects and principles document that will be presented and discussed at the June 25th work session of County Council. Hopefully with any additional input that could come at the July 9th public hearing, we'll then finally get approval by County Council by resolution on July 16th, which would occur on the same date as the third reading of the penny ordinance would occur. So lots of work lay before us, but today, if we could, Mr. Chair, and I'll wrap this up, some focused conversation around the duration of the penny. And we gave three options, but there are certainly many, but we gave three options in the ordinance: 15, 20, or 25 years, recognizing that 15 yields approximately $2.2 billion worth of penny collections, 20 yields approximately $3.1 billion of penny collections, and 25 years yields just north of $4 billion of penny collections. So those were decision points. How we're going to split up the dollars among the categories, that's a decision point. And then finally, we are recommending that council have the option of issuing bonds that are approved by the voters in the referendum for purposes of jump-starting the projects. There's a TBD right now present in the ordinance for the bonding amount. And we would sort of, I think, ask you to first consider the duration of the penny, and then we might then advise you on what the bond amount should be depending upon how long and how much the penny is going to collect. So those three items, Mr. Chair, are critical for today's conversation. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. And I also want to recognize a few more of our colleagues that are present this afternoon. We have Councilwoman Terracio, who chairs the comment. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you,
Mr.
sorry I'm
Terracio.
late.
And that's okay, no apology needed. We also have Councilwoman English, who is attending virtually, along with Councilwoman Shakese Newton, who's virtual also. All right. So with that in mind, I want to open the floor up for discussion, comments, questions. Anyone seeking to be recognized? Well, at least, I'm sorry, Councilman Weaver, and then Ms. Mackey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jones, I did have one question. When you say 20% to comment enhancement, I'm assuming that means enhancement includes operations, of course. That's not just improvements. That's 20% of the total budget.
Yes, sir.
Operations and whatever improvements they want to make. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Mackey, you recognized.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk and share my thoughts related to the duration and amount piece. I think we've looked at, I guess the last work session we had, we saw different projected amounts and where it would be at each year. And based off, I think, growth and where we are now and kind of looking at what happened with the current penny, I feel like, a 20-year or even a 22, 23-year is more of a duration that we would want to lean to. The current one that we have was 22 years, and we saw how quickly we got to that amount. And so I definitely think I don't want to go less than what we currently have right now, just based on the projections that we saw and what we all know needs to kind of happen in Richland County as we're growing and making sure we're meeting the transportation needs.
Follow up to that, you recognize Mr. Racio.
Thank you. And I'll just share that during the comment board, there was definitely a comment made about not going less than what we currently have because we did reach this dollar amount so quickly. And so we didn't want to have to keep going back again and again. I know there's probably the opposite, those who might say, oh, well, maybe that's a good thing to be going back sooner rather than later. But it is, as we have seen, a great effort and something that the public, that we need to go and talk to the public about pretty regularly. So, thank you.
Oh, I have a question, Mr. Jones. You mentioned 20-year. I thought the numbers that were provided to us previously, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I remember 15 years, I remember 25 years, and I thought the number in between was 22, or was it 20 that was provided to us previously?
What we showed you at the work session, I think we actually showed you 15, 19, 20, and 20, 22, and 25. So we showed you a couple of different spots along the projections. I believe 22 years was set to yield, I'm looking at 3.6. 22 years was suggested to yield 3.6 billion.
Whereas 25 years would yield 4 billion, right?
4.3.
4.3.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And I share Chairwoman Mackey's sentiments as far as not going with fewer years than what we with the current penny. I think the current penny was 22 years, 1.03 billion or something like, was it 1.7, what have you. So I certainly concur with that sentiment, but I also wonder if we ought to look seriously at the 25-year option as well. And I say that because, to Ms. Mackey's point, we did collect the revenue on the current penny at a pace faster than I think most people anticipated at the time the penny was conceived, and even for many of us who came on to council, after the penny had passed, but it was years later. And what I don't want to have happen is we find ourselves in this position again, maybe another, 10, 12 years from now, talking about, passing another penny because, again, the revenues came in a lot sooner than we anticipated. And this is probably a conversation for another day, one that I can have with Mr. Racio, but looking at a more sustainable funding source for transit or for the Comet. While we know that with the sales tax, the revenue that's generated, it comes in quickly, but then you have to ask yourself, are we going to do this, go through this exercise every 10, 12, 15 years to continue funding transit needs, in the county? And so I would probably feel a little more comfortable with the 25-year. I'm not saying that's where I am right now, but probably be a little more comfortable with it. Not so much because the dollar amount generated would be greater, but I think it also buys us a little more time to start thinking about more sustainable ways, to fund public transportation in Richland County. So just my thoughts.
Mr. Chair, can you add me to your list?
You recognize Ms. Newton.
Thank you. And sorry, I don't see how to raise my hand virtually.
Okay.
I would like to concur with the conversation that we're having about a longer time frame and just add an additional reason to the mix, which is the fact that a lot of these transportation projects just quite frankly take time to do. And there's only so many transportation projects we'll be able to do at one time. They have to be conceived of, designed, public input, et cetera. There's so many things that happen even before a project is put out to bid. And so when you combine that with the greater visibility that we're talking about, and just really the ability to plan for more things, I would concur that a longer time frame is better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. Comments or thoughts just on, the time frame or the duration for this penny?
Mr. Chair.
Tracio, and then Mr.
And not to belabor
Grant.
this, but I do appreciate that you brought up the funding source for transit, because kind of getting to a certain point where we have to hold our breath for the next round is probably not the most sustainable way to fund our transit system.
You recognize Mr. Branham.
Thank you. It's just kind of a general comment, and I've shared it with several of my colleagues one-on-one, but I feel like we should be motivated to, feel to some extent like we are being responsive to some of the concerns that were voiced through media or whatever of the penny, I'll call it 1.0, the first version, as we propose the second version. And so that is not a comment in response to anything specifically that anybody has said today, but I for myself want to feel and know that if possible, that what we present is grounded in part in response, so that the public and so that the voters feel like, some of the concerns that have been voiced have been heard. And that's not to bless any of them, but as has been noted, I think all but one of us that are currently on council were not on council with Penny 1.0, and it's an opportunity for us to learn from experiences of others. We've all been paying attention. We're all trying to study from history and present something that we feel like is recommended by us, and that is also viable in the eyes of the public and the voters that will vote. So part of my analysis is looking at how would Penny 2.0 be different from Penny 1.0, and how are those differences indicative of that there is a recognition of some of the concerns from Penny 1.0.
And Councilman Brown, would that be, I guess, in addition to a statement, would that be more of like a question as to how could we make Penny, Penny 2.0, if you will, different from Penny 1.0? In terms of, I guess, what instilling, public confidence and giving the public having some sense of assurance that everything we're doing is above board. Not that it wasn't with Penny 1.0, but everything we're doing is above board, transparent, there's accountability and the like.
All of that, and just the fact that we do have the benefit of hindsight now, 10, 12 years from the beginning of Penny 1.0, to be able to assess performance and true need, maybe as it relates to comment, but also I in my mind have some sense that all of the areas that we began to address in Penny 1.0, they probably didn't all start off with an equal level of need. There was an equal apportionment of the money in Penny 1.0, but I don't know that the need was really equal at that time. And if it wasn't, how great were the needs and how were they addressed by Penny 1.0? If some areas were addressed better than others, like we're not as deficient as we were before, is it now appropriate in the allocations between the three categories to, kind of emphasize one over another because we see a continuing need being greater in one versus others?
Makes sense. Well, I'll say this, Councilman. I think on the transparency and accountability front, with Penny 1.0, as I understand it, we ended up with the Transportation Advisory Committee, or TPAC, which was designed, for oversight, if you will, from citizens, right? And so, since my time on council, I've attended those meetings fairly regularly. And so there are updates provided by Director Maloney and his team as it pertains to, transportation projects. And the comments, they also have someone who, appears at those meetings as well and, provides updates regarding just what's happening with public transportation in Richland County. I think the other thing is with Penny 1.0, you had projects that were specifically enumerated in the ordinance, right? And as I understand it from talking to Councilman Livingston, that was done intentionally, to sort of assuage any sort of angst or concerns that people had, about the penny, if things were being done in a transparent manner, or if we were being fair or what have you. I know this time around with Penny 2.0, we're talking about deviating to some degree from having those projects enumerated just because we learned the lessons of the past, how that sort of tied the hands of council, right? When it came to, if there was, if we had to make any changes, or if there was if there was a need to kind of deviate, we really couldn't do that because those projects were enumerated in the ordinance. And so we're talking about giving ourselves a little more flexibility this time around. What I would be curious, and I would like to hear Councilman Livingston's input on this, I don't want to say it's a political question, but I do wonder about, based on your experience, Councilman Livingston, when you all passed the penny back, when the voters voted yes for the penny in 2012, were there concerns about the size or the dollar amount during your deliberations and discussions? I don't know how some residents would feel about 3.1 billion versus, a penny that is in the amount of 4 billion. Do you have any insights that you can share from your time?
There were some concerns. As a matter of fact, we started out as low as 15 years, but the concern there was had to do with the main focus that we started out with was the comment. And many thought that maybe if we did 15 years, there may not be enough time to sustain the comment. That was one of the things that kind of pushed on to 20 years. And as the projects grew, remember the last time there was twice as many needs as there was funding that we agreed on. So we had to do some significant cutbacks in terms of creating a priority list at that particular time. Now, the real issue at that particular time, keep in mind that slowed the project down, had more to do with community engagement, had more to do with us, trying to make sure there's local and minority participation. It's those issues that really slow things down, because you may recall that's when DRR came in and said, you can't use the funds to do your wonderful website, engage people, inform folks. You can't use those funds with your small business office and so forth. So that was really the only true contention at that particular time with the penny. I don't recall anything other beyond that particular point in terms of any major issues. And then there was a little bit of concern about with the program development team in terms of whether or not there was a better way of providing services, but that was modeled after Charleston and other programs. But I don't think there's any things that I could think of during that particular time that we really need to worry about, other than just simply making sure that those things that DRR suggests that we should not do things that are not tethered to a particular project, should not be funded. But now we do, we'll do that with our general fund monies, as we've done recently. But one contention too was early on is the public was concerned. There was some concern about 25 years, but that was kind of pushed back from the voters, and so that's why we settled for 22. Well, just,
So that was, yeah. Oh. Ms. Mackey, and then
Thank you. Because Councilman Branham, your comment about how do we, ensure, show the public that it is different. I think that's a valid comment because as you mentioned, majority of us, a large majority of us weren't here, right? And many of us I know were members of the public at that time that voted on the penny and had some of those same frustrations that we hear folks having concerns about. And so I do think there is, time for us, this current body, to acknowledge the efforts that all of us have done since being on council to make sure that the penny, as you call it, 1.0, is going in the right direction. And I know we can't ignore those feelings that people have, but we all have worked hard since being on council to right the ship of the current one and make sure we're not repeating the previous mistakes. And so oftentimes, everybody has a different district and how your constituents feel are different. My district is fast growing. A large part of my district, they didn't live here when the last one voted, right? They didn't vote in it. They don't know. What they do know right now is that they need widened roads. They need more sidewalks. And why isn't it here? Hardscrabble's taking too long, right? Though that's what they know. And so I do think there's a certain group population that they were here, they are frustrated, why didn't things happen? And as Mr. Livingston mentioned, the PDT stuff, that's gone. We're operating the penny in-house. We, have a really great, transparent website where it's updated regularly. Folks can go find out what's going on in the projects. We're actually going out in the communities with the Transportation Department speaking to the public if requested. And so I feel like the things that we're seeing now is a start to show that, look, we're already taking this current one that we have very seriously and making sure we're not going to make mistakes of what you heard in the past, right? Now, going forward, I know we're going to have to continue to prove and show that. But I do think with this time around, us moving towards the priorities that we talked about in the principles piece, I think that's the key piece. I think that's where we have to, as a body, dive in and talk about where is the need, right? Because as you mentioned previously, that whole list, everything maybe was weighted equally. And that's not the case. We all know that that's not the case now. We have to really set the principles and priorities that state, well, what really is a need? How are we as a body setting those priorities so the public understands if it's safety, if it's reduced traffic time, what are those things that we're saying is important? Because we didn't do that the last penny, right? We just put some projects on the list and said go. And we didn't plan for the future or think about what would happen. And I do feel like this go around, the approach we're taking is a thoughtful one that says we are thinking about the future. We know we're going to grow, and we want to make sure that 10 years from now, we're not having the same conversation with you that we didn't plan for or think about it and allow us to move. So I think the piece that you bring up and how to address it is really in our priorities and principles, not necessarily the duration or amount, but is showing when we talk about priority and principles what that really means, even down to, the administration piece, making sure everybody knows we're not going to do a PDT anymore, right? We're going to continue operating in-house, and council is going to be very much involved. TPAT's going to be involved this go around. All of those things I think we can spell out to show there are a list of things that are way different this go around than the first one.
Mr. Chair.
Brandon, before I get to you, I know Mr. Jones had wanted to chime in, so you defer to Mr. Wright, Mr. Jones? All right, Mr. Wright, and then Mr. Jones.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, and also, there have come out in 2022 some guidelines from the Department of Revenue that did not exist in 2010 or 2012. So there are guidelines that exist now that we can go by and say, okay, these are things you can do or can't do, that wasn't there before. So when Richland County initially passed the penny before, you kind of was doing it. It's like, and you kind of had a situation where people were saying that, oh, well, should you be doing that? And so there's a question where there wasn't guidance before, but now we have it. So it's there. And as of 2022, there are specific guidelines that we know that we have to follow.
Before I get to you, Mr. Jones, Mr. Livingston wants to jump back in. Mr. Livingston?
Let me respond again to part of Mr. Branham's question. One big difference the last time, too, was I think we were dealing with an issue of trust from the community. Now, it wasn't quite true when the statement was made that projects were just put on a list and just let it go. That wasn't true at all. You remember the last time we had the confidence from the public because we had a 39-member commission that actually worked with the consultant and decided on every last one of those projects. Council did not make a decision about a single one of those projects. It fully adopted the recommendation of that committee. And that's what they gave the public trust in the fact that these projects are going to be okay. County council cannot change them and so forth. So that's what I think led to the difference in the failure of the referendum in 2010 and the passing of it in 2012, because it created that trust that those are projects that were decided by an independent group of citizens in Richland County and not the county council. This time around, the difference is we're doing a little bit different in the sense that we're not identifying all specific projects, and there are good reasons why, and I support that, but that was the difference from the last time.
Mr. Jones?
Maybe to echo and maybe to add a little bit, I recognize all of us go through lots of information every day, and so if I were to explain this to somebody, and I do, not unlike you all, people say, you know anything about the Richland Penny? I'm like, maybe a little bit. If you have questions, call Emily Luther, is normally what I say in public. But no, in all honesty, these are the things I say to folks, and I think they are just things that any voter could appreciate. First is, this is our penny. We manage the penny in-house, and yes, there may have been questions regarding things that we may have gone through with the new penny, but we learned those lessons. We brought the penny in-house. We managed the penny in accordance with the guidelines that were established candidly on the fly, right? Not in advance of when we had our last penny, but during the pendency of our penny. And we have not had one issue with anything on the penny for the past several years since all of that settled and since we brought it in-house. So it's our penny. We manage it in-house, and our folks do a great job managing the penny. And they'll manage the future penny as well. But the second thing is the process of public input that the council has led here, I think, is distinctive. And we've looked at a number of other pennies and a lot of other places. And it is not unusual, for instance, for them to have one committee sort of providing some sort of public input. But just for purposes of the public record and this committee, let's look back at what's going on with this penny. The transportation needs assessment that's been undertaken as a result of the council's leadership has engaged the public in each and every district within the county. They've had several hundred sort of interactions with the public about transportation needs in the county. And that's on top of taking in information from other governmental sources who also gauge public need. So there has been a long-running dialogue with the public about this that is now continuing because of the charge that you all gave to the Transportation Penny Advisory Committee on this penny. There's a group of citizens in a reconstituted, reinvigorated committee who are actively looking at these projects, asking good questions, asking questions about, have we thought about this? Have we thought about that? They're gathering upstairs every 2 weeks with a room packed full of people. So, and there are a number of new TPAC members that are there because this county council charged them with providing advice and input on this penny to make sure that it meets the needs of the community. And of course, not only are we getting their input, but it's flowing through this committee as well, so that by the time it gets to county council, there's been a lot of thoughtful conversation about almost every issue that appears on council's agenda. And oh, by the way, may I remind you that council committed to not one, not two, but 19 different public meetings between March 19th and July 16th to make sure this penny got the airtime that the public needed it to have, including a public hearing at which no reading will occur, which in my experience as your council is one of the first times that's ever happened. And it's by design to make sure that there's appropriate pause in the process for public input. The final thing I would say is And to your point, Mr. Walker, about kind of being hamstrung a little bit by the method of approval of the last penny. You know, you don't know what you don't know, but we've learned. And so rather than being hamstrung, not only are we setting up a set of projects and principles to allow the program to be dynamic, to address the needs we know about now, and just as importantly, to address emerging needs, things that have yet to show up, but could show up in 5 years. This will be the first time, with approval of council, that some money is set aside in each project category for emerging needs that members of the council and members of the public can identify, not today, but 4 or 5 years from now, if and when they should occur. All those are clear differences in the way one penny worked versus the way this penny would work.
I guess as it pertains to the duration, you recognize Mr. Brown?
Thanks. Yeah, I think this has been great. This is a great discussion. That's my opinion.
Well, it's not over yet.
No, it's not over
Councilman,
yet.
I mean, you know, we have, you know,
We got time.
yeah, we still got some time this afternoon. We're not done.
Duration, amount, and allocation of categories. So, I mean, the duration, you know, it could end up being about the same. That's where the conversation is. Penny 2.0 versus 1 point. Amount, it's the same 1 penny. It's just going to raise a different amount because we're different times in a growing community, which is awesome. So I was just glad to see the allocation to categories, again, that we're not necessarily just by default assuming that it's going to be a third, like Penny 1.0 was. The draft right now is sitting at like a 40-40-20 split instead. So as much as, you know, maybe there's nuance and detail that are important, we know, because of how we pay attention. And I've got great confidence in our transportation department here at the county. And I also know that, you know, we are the by far primary funding source for COMET, which is an important part of our community. That those high points that we're talking about right now, those 3 fill in the blanks, will be the ones that people hold on to if they tune in at all to the conversation. So I feel like it would be nice if there was a difference on the allocation to categories based on good conversation and data. That would be one place where we could show a high level difference between the 2 pennies.
Before I get to you, I think we probably jump, you know, to allocation to categories, because I think duration and amount, those 2 things go hand in hand. I mean, if we settle on 15 years, we know what that generates. If we settle on 20 years, 22 years, 25 years, we know what that generates, unless there, you know, someone wants to have more discussion on the amount. But Ms. Mackey, you're recognized.
Thank you. And I did, just for clarification, because I'm not sure of this, so I want to be clear. In the penny 1.0, but the current transportation penny, we actually spelled out that we were dividing things a third. I didn't recall.
No,
Yeah, I
so-
didn't recall that. So I guess I heard him say that, and I just wanted to make sure for the record we understand. In the current penny, there was no dividing out of anything. Whereas this one, we are saying, let's identify how to set, but the current penny, there is no dividing out of anything.
Jones wants to be recognized.
Okay.
Mr. Jones.
Yeah, and it might just be a matter of degree. I think you're right. There were no percentages necessarily, but there was a maximum amount to be assigned.
There were dollar amounts.
Yeah, there was a dollar amount, and when you look at it, I think it was 28% roughly would have gone to comment-related projects, and then the other 72% would have gone to more traditional projects. There weren't categories in the nature that we're discussing now.
Yes. And so it wasn't broken up a third. It was a set percent to comment, and the rest went to projects overall that were in a list, but it wasn't broken down. So I think that was the thing I want to make sure. So that is one difference too. With the current penny, there is, these categories don't even exist. And so there isn't a percentage breakdown.
Thank you. Yes, I think my point was made. That's okay. Thank you.
Well, I mean, let's sort of move the conversation to, you know, the allocation, you know, per category. I think that this is a very important subject. 'cause I think we have to, decide, would we prefer to see what's been proposed, 40% for county advancement, right? So that would be, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Jones, but more so like the hard scrabble roads, the Blythewood roads, right? Primarily DOT owned and maintained roads, where we say county advancement.
Could be.
Is that what we're getting at?
I'd say
I
it's
know
a
that's not all the roads, but I mean, but similar projects.
The way it's been defined, on the one hand, it's consistent with what you just said, large, well-traveled corridors. So that, I think, would very much fall into the line of what you're talking about. But then there may be other projects that just have countywide impact. And those could be, for instance, improvements that are made to facilitate economic development or other development that would then create jobs for the entire county, things like that. So that's, but they tend to be larger, more impactful projects across a broader population, not just necessarily a single community within the county.
Recognize Ms. May.
All right, I don't know if this is helpful or not, because I don't know if everybody has it in front of them. The definitions that we had in the work session did break down each categories, and I don't know if it's ability to put them on the screen that might help folks as we talk about allocations to kind of understand the difference between community investment versus county advancement. Because we have, as a body, kind of gone over this definition and talked about it as a whole, but sometimes it is not right in front of you. It may be hard to remember.
Mr. Chair,
Recognize Mr. Brown.
to add some additional information to just provide this particular body even more input about specific steps that the county has taken to show its stewardship. We also have an independent audit of the penny. So we have the general audit for the county, but we also have one independent for the penny that we do that communicates that the funds were used in accordance with the guidelines. That is also a part of the rules now, but the county does that. So that's something, to the extent you were not aware of that, that is something that we also do. And then in addition to that, we also certify via a letter from myself and or the finance director to the Department of Revenue, again, our compliance with our agreements with them. So again, those are two additional things that the county does in addition to the other things that reflect our stewardship of penny dollars. So we certainly can be financially confident that the county is and continues to be in compliance with the guidelines associated with the penny.
And Mr. Brown, that independent audit, its findings, is that available to the public? Is that on the website? Or is that something that's just kept internally in-house?
It is something that's kept internally in-house. It's something that, again, that we do in reference to that. I don't think there's anything with it being public, but I wanted you to know that that is another step that is taken to reflect our stewardship of the penny program.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
So just
Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
by way of background, what's on the screen is the definition of the categories that's in the ordinance, was also presented to County Council at the work session on April the 23rd.
Thank you. So, Mr. Jones, with those categories, and I don't know if I'm making this up or not. So, because I've had a lot of conversations about this thing. So, didn't we have like a breakdown? Did we have a breakdown of what goes where, or that's what we have to decide?
The percentages, Councilman Barron? Yes, ma'am. We had it at 40% 40 to the first category, 40 to the second category, and 20 to the third. It was in brackets in the ordinance, just to prompt some discussion.
So if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Ms. Smith.
So I would, since we're having this conversation, and I'm assuming that maybe a out of this committee today, and I know it took place earlier with the comment, but I would, you gave an amount, but a little more details to be able to, really have a healthy dialogue about, where they stand with things. I know you said, $900 million was 30%. I think that's what I got, right? Is there anything else you can share with us that took place in that meeting today?
I can. I'm glad to. So there were. It was excellent information, and certainly I would invite the chair of the comment to chime in. But there were 5 areas that the comment highlighted that they wanted to focus on. One was a multimodal transportation center, and I have a handout here that I'll be glad to send to the clerk that they provided to us this afternoon, and we'll get it to you all. But a multimodal transportation center, which I understood to mean sort of a new hub of transportation for all buses that would be separate and apart from what is located on the corner of Sumter and, is that Richland? Yeah, but it's
Laurel.
Sumter and Laurel. Yeah, so at the corner of Sumter and Laurel, that there's a thought that there would be something not built there, but built elsewhere to sort of replace that and maybe even expand it.
And to provide for other transit opportunities. So it would be a hub for, say, ride share and other kinds of transportation going forward.
So that was number one, that center and the construction of it. And unfortunately, I don't have right now cost breakdowns, but these are the big areas that were discussed. The second large project was increased frequency on existing routes and enhanced paratransit services for folks that need those services. The third thing was, anything to add to that, Mr. Ratio?
No, but I just brought up a spreadsheet with some cost breakdowns that I might be able to help with that. Thank you.
Right. So increases on existing routes. Then they had something called micro-transit services, which were intended to be routes in Laurel Richland, Blythewood, and other parts of the county to supplement existing Comet bus system. It was meant to enhance the equity, reliability, and efficiency of the system, and also connect communities within the system. And finally, there was something called bus rapid transit, which was the potential for creating bus-only lanes along some major thoroughfares to enable buses to get through traffic more quickly. Those were 4 programs that were highlighted. The only other thing I would add that I gleaned from the presentation was that, of course, on the comment side of the House, y'all may recall, from the guidelines, Supreme Court, everything else, for comment purposes, the penny can pay for both operations and projects. Whereas for the county, we're paying for capital projects. And so we're not paying for maintenance, we're not paying for operations, we're paying for building things. And then we may have administrative costs tethered to building things. So rules are slightly different from the comment. And so I understand that in addition to these 4 areas, there would also be expenditures for continuing operation of the comment.
Just one final thing, and I just kind of jotted down what you were saying, and I don't really have any major challenges with these categories, but I would, it might be helpful that full council receives the same presentation, because when you say the microtransit, I live in Blythewood. I have heard that at one point we had transportation that was coming out there, and it was cut because of the lack of use. So it was not even being used. So the fact that Comet is perhaps, and I'm not saying that they don't need it in Lower Richland, they may do, but specifically for the Blythewood area, what I know, I would have a challenge with us funding something that there isn't a need. So as we dig deeper into this conversation, I really want us to to make sure that we're funding the things that are necessity, and that that gives us an opportunity to expand other services, but just not doing things because I just already know that bus in Blythewood is going to be a waste. We tried that before. So when we look at moving this forward and the percentages and the amounts, we all have great ideas and want to, this is an opportunity for great things to be done in our county, but let's be realistic in our approach. Thank you.
Ms. Barron, Mr. Racio, and then Mr. Livingston.
Thank you. And if I could just speak to that a little bit to kind of share a little bit about the inner workings of the COMET. For those folks who think, oh, this bus isn't being used and we continue to run it, every month there's a service committee that does meet and does review things like bus use and numbers, who's getting off, who's getting on, where they're getting on and where they're getting off. And then if it's determined that a route does need to be changed, then there is a process that has to be observed. That's a federally required process in terms of time and notice and that sort of thing, so that we're not just adding routes and taking routes away willy-nilly, or adding stops and taking stops away willy-nilly. There's a fair process for that. And so over my course of time at the COMET, which is about 4 years now, we've voted on, adding service here or removing service there that is responsive to ridership. So it's difficult to look into the future to see where are people going to be getting on and off the bus, and that's why the COMET can be responsive in that way to ridership. Mm-hmm.
Livingston?
Yes. Jones, we came up with this list of identified needs in terms of projects. I think it was a two point whatever billion dollars or whatever. Can we have we taken that list and said, here's what's on this list that fits in the category of investment projects, here's what fits in the category of advanced projects? We have that, right?
In process, because sometimes there's a judgment call to be made.
Right, and
about,
I see some can overlap and so forth too, but and I asked that question because that is what would help me to decide what percentage I want to put in the category, because knowing what's going to be where. So I just want to make note that would be helpful for me. And if there's an overlap, that's fine too with some of those projects. Also, do you know of any specific changes in terms of use of the funding for the transportation penny since the last penny? In terms,
I would just say that we have an established set of rules now that maybe were subject to more interpretation 10, 12 years ago that are I think, much more clear now. And so I would say that the rules are the same, but maybe just there's been clarity brought to the rules by court decision and revenue rulings and things like that.
At one time I remember a question about changes in terms of expenditure and
Thank you. I know we were getting our time, and so I wanted to make a motion related to the duration and amount. I'd like to make a motion for 25 years and the projected amount, which is 4.3 billion.
Second. I'll second it. Discussion.
Yeah, it's discussion. That's what happens.
Okay. Councilman Weaver, you are
Make a decision.
recognized.
Well, I didn't realize we were getting to this point this quickly. The only thing I'll say is, I think 25 years is a long time. That most of us won't be on council. Probably none of us will be on council. Paul may be on council by then, but none of us will be on council in 25 years. And I just think we're kind of binding the hands of future councils too long if we do that. I understand we don't want to make it 10 years, but I'm kind of more in the 15 to 20-year camp. That's all I'll say.
Let me just add to that, Councilman Weaver. And this may help with some of your angst or misgivings, but with the current penny, it was 22 years, right? And so we're going to collect in full on the current penny by, is it what, December 2026? Correct? So that would put us about, is that 11, 12 years ahead of schedule. So while the number is 25 years, it may very well be that this penny could come off the books quicker, maybe 15 years, with all the growth that we're seeing in the county, economic development and so on. So while I know 25 years may give you some heartburn, but know that just based on what we've seen with the county's recent history, with just growth, this very well could come off the books a decade in advance. So go ahead, you recognize.
Thank you. Can I say one more thing in that
Absolutely.
regard? I mean, we just never know what's around the corner. In 2015, we had the 1,000-year flood. We don't know what the county's going to be facing. We already know we have some buildings, large buildings, i.e. courthouse, that need to be replaced. And I just hate for us to box ourselves in too long on that. So I just can't wrap my head around 25 years at this point. Maybe I'll be persuaded in the future, but.
How does 22 years sound to you? Is that more palatable, 22?
Well, it was 22 years last time. I'm for rolling the clock back a little bit.
I just thought I'd ask, that's all. Any additional discussion? Ms. Barron and then Ms. Mackey.
Thank you. So I can't believe I'm saying this, but I kind of agree with Don. I kind of agree because I'm thinking, we know that we are going to get to the amount quicker than 25 years. So because we know that, we can anticipate, the 25 years is a stretch for me. Even the 4 point whatever billion dollars is somewhat a stretch, But at the same time, I'm thinking if we accomplish what we set out to do in 11, 12 years before, what's the big deal about either staying the same or slightly going lower? That would be my challenge. I'm not saying that I'm not going to support it, but I do think that there may be some room for negotiation. I'll just say I don't have a vote on this committee, but I think that there's room for negotiation here.
Well, and I'm glad you're giving your input, Ms. Barron, because I would rather us have this discussion and be, this thorough and forthright and candid about it than, wait until we get the full council. Right. So I believe me, your input and your thoughts on this is more than appreciated and invaluable. Ms. Mackey and then Mr. Livingston.
Thank you. Just wanted to share a little bit behind my thinking of the motion I made, in that I understand the concern related to a longer period of time, but really I look at the dollar amount, the $4.3 billion, and look at our growing county, and we all know there are so many projects that need to be completed. And so for me, this is a solution to say to residents that this will make sure we have the money to complete several of the large projects that need to be completed in this penny. Because if we reduce the year, you're also reducing the collection amount. And that's my concern, is making sure that when we do this, we have the money to go to work and get the projects done. And so that's really more so of my, if I could get to the amount at a lesser year, fine. But for me, it's more so the amount and knowing that, it's not going to be 25 years based on history. We're probably going to collect it sooner, but that means we have more money to get more projects done. So that's kind of my logic behind it.
Mr. Chair.
Right.
And I did want to bring up, just to remind people, what Ray kind of brought up earlier, is that what may, if you decide to do it, also is bonds. So the bond is based on the amount that you allocate for with the years. So the more the money you have, the more potential money you have for the bond to start work earlier.
Yeah, one of my concerns is no matter what we do, the public's gonna have to decide. We have to think in terms of what we think is gonna be palatable and influence the public to support what we wanna do. And one of the things I've been saying already is, well, we just continue what we're doing, we continue independent and so forth. And to me, it would be more palatable. I think if we did 22 years again, so we can say it's the same, it's pretty much the same thing, and just roll it over, and I think it'd be more acceptable to folks in that particular way. So that's why I would prefer maybe just simply doing another 22 years, so it doesn't change.
Sure. And if I can just add to your point about, what's palatable to the public, and that's why I asked the question earlier about, 4 billion versus 3.6 versus 2.2, and just what your experience was with the first penny, whether or not there was a number that sort of shocked the conscience, if you will, of the electorate. And then also in terms of, what's palatable to the public is when we get into the allocations, right? So while we're talking about county advancement projects, which I know are very important, like you got Shot Road Extension, how all that got opened up, right, led to Mark Anthony Brewing, and we got Green Street, and how that's going to open up the riverfront, right? So that would be county advancement. Hardscrabble Road, county advancement, right? But then you have folks who say, well, what about my dirt road, or what about my street, or what about my road, or what about the sidewalk in my neighborhood, which ties more in with community investment. And so just when we think about the percentages as far as an allocation, would it be prudent to, set aside, if you will, 40% for county advancement vis-a-vis community investment, or should the number be slightly higher for community investment? I don't know, maybe that number should be, perhaps that number should be 40%, and maybe county investment 35. I'm sorry, county enhancement, advancement rather, 35%. So I'm not sure, but those are sort of the questions I'm asking in my head, which is, in order for this to be more palatable to the electorate, would it be, maybe, is it 4.3 billion, or is it 3.6 billion? I'm with Ms. Mackey. I'm comfortable with the 4.3 billion, and should the percentage be higher, for community investment, vis-a-vis, county advancement? And obviously, I don't think we're going to settle that question today, as far as on the allocation piece, but certainly it's something that I'm grappling with, because I want this to pass. You recognize Ms. Mackey?
Sorry, I was just going to say it. I know we are at time, so you're right, we may not sell it all today, but we do have to settle soon and communicate. I think that was the process that we agreed to. And so come next Tuesday, May 14th, there is a duration, amount, and allocation that needs to be shared with the public. And so that I don't want us to, get off path or get off schedule. I want everybody to be fully aware that's what we committed to, and I want to make sure that we continue to do that. And so whatever that is, everybody has to get there so that the public knows, so that they can digest and give us that feedback by the public hearing, right? So we know, but we can't not make the decision. We need to make the decision now.
Well, Ms. Mackey, to your point about being decisive, then how about a friendly amendment to your motion? I believe your motion was to recommend 25 years, 4.3 billion, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
And maybe accept a friendly amendment to that motion of an allocation, to 40% county advancement, 40% community investment, and 20% transit.
Sir.
Okay. So she's accepted a friendly amendment.
Yes, I've accepted.
All right. Ms. Tracia?
Thank you. Heard the amendment, heard that the percentages were allocated as sort of previously discussed. would like to take a hot second and do some math to figure out what that means for the
Keep in
comment.
mind-
Thank you.
And keep in mind, Mr. Racio, it's just the recommendation that's coming out. I mean, to Ms. Mackey's point, wanting to stay on schedule so we can, once it gets to full council, people can make, amendments or what have you. So,
Final thing, and really quick.
yeah, you recognize Ms. Barron.
And that is, I totally agree with Mr. Livingston. You know, if it's easier to present something that people are already comfortable with. But when we start to present it, and I know that's not the motion, but something could come up, right? So as we are presenting, I think communications has done a great job keeping everyone update. But I don't know if saying this the same thing is going to be palatable. I don't know that, because I'm telling you, I got hard scrabble on my mind right now. I don't want, and that is the poster child for this penny. So if we decide to say, we're going to do 22 years again, the last thing I want us to say is, it's like the previous penny, because it's not going to be, it's not going. People will accept it because the format is the same, but in their mind, they have a visual of projects that didn't get done. That's all.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, you recognize.
two things. One, I know Hardscrabble is funded with the penny, but it's not a Richland County project. It's the DOT project. And I know that people don't really understand that, but
Preach that sermon now for the past 2
right.
years.
It's not a
Folks in
Richland.
District 8.
It's not a Richland County project, and Richland County doesn't have control of it. That's South Carolina Department of Transportation, not Richland County.
I know a point, and I know that a point Ms. Mackey has made in conversations is that what makes Hardscrabble, different from say maybe other penny projects that are state roads, but didn't take as long as that Hardscrabble is managed by DOT, and that's not throwing any shade at them. Whereas some of these other projects that we have worked on that are state roads were managed by the county. So that's also an important distinction.
And my second thing is that you do have to make a decision today because the second reading is Tuesday.
Oh, we are. That's
So,
why we substitute motion.
It is something that we do kind of have to at least make a recommendation to full council. The committee has to make a recommendation to full council.
Right. And I guess I have a parliamentary question. So Ms. Mackey has accepted the friendly amendment. And so does that need to be seconded? I'm just drawing a blank.
I think if it's accepted, you can go ahead and do the vote if you want to.
Making sure. You recognize Ms. Mackey.
All right, Ms. English.
English, you
She's
recognize?
online.
Thank you all. I just wanted to just kind of go on record that I kind of agree with the 25-year, only because I feel like it would leave the county in a better position, kind of like what John said, when we're no longer around, that those funds will still be there to generate and take care of the things that need to be taken care of. So I just kind of wanted to just say that and openly let you all know that that's something in full council that I would support.
English, that ain't what Councilman Weaver said. He said he won't be around.
No, I'm saying that's what I meant.
That's what she meant.
We won't be around, but there will be others who will carry on the work that we started.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you, Ms. English. Any additional discussion or questions? Madam Clerk, take the vote, please.
Livingston,
Yes.
Weaver,
No.
Walker,
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right. Next item on the agenda is
Motion to
adjournment.
adjourn?
Need a second.
Second.
It's moved to properly second, non-debatable. Madam Clerk.
Livingston,
Yes.
Weaver,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Motion approved.
We are adjourned.
Okay.
Madam Clerk, so for the 3 o'clock.